In 1871, a Boston city inspector named Charles Warren was assigned to document the condition of basements in the historic Beacon Hill neighborhood. It was routine work: check the foundations, record moisture levels, file a report. But when Warren descended into the basement of a building on Mount Vernon Street, officially constructed in 1822, he found something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. The basement floor sat about 6 feet below street level, normal for a basement, but the street level was higher than it should have been. Warren started measuring. He compared threshold heights, window openings, front stoop steps. He pulled old city maps, and gradually a picture began to form that he could not explain. Boston streets had been buried, raised by roughly 5 to 6 feet, on top of something that had already been there. Warren recorded this in his working notes. Those notes were held in the Boston Municipal Archive until 1974, when the archive was reorganized and a portion of the documents was deemed to have no historical value. If you're interested in history that doesn't make it into the textbooks, subscribe. Every week, I examine anomalies in the official historical record, architectural inconsistencies, and the testimony of people history chose to forget. The official history of American city building in the 19th century goes like this. After the Revolution, young American cities grew rapidly. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Cincinnati all experienced construction booms. Population was rising. Roads, buildings, and infrastructure were needed. Streets were repaved. Wooden sidewalks gave way to stone. Drainage systems were laid along roadbeds, which required grading and fill to establish proper slope. City engineers leveled the terrain, filling low areas and cutting down hills. The official story explains the rise in street levels with exactly this: engineering work, flood control, and sewer installation. That's a reasonable explanation. Urban construction did raise surface grades, especially in commercial districts where fill for drainage was standard practice. Chicago is the textbook example. In the 1850s, engineer Ellis Chesbrough designed a plan to raise the city's streets by 5 to 10 feet to create a functioning sewer system. Buildings were literally jacked up. Newspapers covered it. It was a public municipal project with documentation, contracts, and contractors. The official story is clean and logical. But here's where it gets strange. If street levels were raised by engineering projects, we should be able to find the paperwork, fill contracts, newspaper coverage of the construction, city council records approving the work. In Chicago, that paperwork exists. The Chesbrough project is well documented, but look at other cities. In Boston, there is no documentation of any large-scale street-raising project in the Beacon Hill neighborhood during the first half of the 19th century. No contracts, no newspaper coverage, no city council records. But street levels there run 5 to 6 feet higher than the architecture of the buildings lining those streets would suggest. Look at early photographs of American cities from the 1840s and 1850s. Pay attention to the first floors of the buildings. Ground floor windows frequently begin right at street level or partially below it. Front doors are often set several steps down from the sidewalk. But buildings are designed so that the first floor sits above grade. That's basic construction logic. So either architects in the 1820s and 1840s were routinely making a bizarre error, designing buildings with windows below ground level, or the ground level rose after those buildings were constructed. Now let's look at specific numbers. Researcher John Langdon conducted a systematic comparison of archival building drawings against current surface elevations in 14 American cities in 1998. His work, published in a small historical geography journal, found the following. In 11 of the 14 cities, buildings constructed before 1850 showed a discrepancy between the designed first-floor elevation and the current sidewalk grade. The average discrepancy was roughly 4.5 feet. In some locations, it reached over 7 feet. In 8 of those cities, there is no documentation of any municipal grade-raising project that would account for the discrepancy. Langdon submitted his findings to 3 American history journals. All 3 rejected it. Reviewers wrote that his methodology was not standard for historical research, and that the conclusions required alternative explanations. No alternative explanations were offered. Back to Charles Warren. His 1871 working notes survived, partially. Some of the documents from that 1974 reorganization made it through because copies had been kept by his granddaughter, Elizabeth Warren Holt, who donated them to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1989. They're still there, catalogued, largely unexamined. Here is what Warren wrote in March of 1871. I have taken measurements at 7 properties on Mount Vernon and Charles Street. In every case, the window openings of the garden-level floors, which by architectural design were intended to sit at, or just above grade, now fall 4 to 6 feet below the sidewalk surface. The thresholds of the main entries, designed as the 0 point of the building, now require a descent of 2 to 3 steps. This cannot be explained by foundation settlement. Settlement moves downward. A building does not sink 5 feet over 50 years without catastrophic structural failure. The street level has risen. It has risen on top of something that was already there. Warren reported his observations to his direct supervisor, City Inspector Thomas Harris. Harris listened, asked for a written report. Warren prepared a 12-page document with drawings and measurements. The report was received, stamped as such, and never referenced in any subsequent city document. Warren stopped raising the issue officially, but in private correspondence with his brother James in Providence, he kept returning to it. In a letter dated November 1871, he wrote, I spoke with old McLaughlin. He has been a mason for 40 years and remembers these blocks before I was born. He told me that when he was a young apprentice in the 1830s, the parlor floors of the Mount Vernon buildings were at street level. They are now basements. He says the ground came up. I asked him when. He said, fast, very fast. Not the way it happens from drainage work, over a few years. He said people didn't discuss it. They simply accepted it and moved on. Mason McLaughlin, 40 years of professional experience. His testimony appears in no official document anywhere. Boston is not the only city. Look at New York, Lower Manhattan, the blocks around Broadway and Wall Street, buildings constructed in the late 18th and early 19th century. In photographs from the 1840s, you see the same thing. Ground-floor windows that by architectural design should sit above grade are level with the sidewalk or below it. The official explanation for New York is land reclamation. Lower Manhattan did expand westward through landfill into the Hudson. That's well documented. The shoreline moved west. But landfill happened at the edges. It did not raise street levels inside already developed blocks at the center of the island. Look at Philadelphia. Public notary William Drake, in his 1889 memoirs, described the courthouse on Chestnut Street where he had worked for 30 years. When I entered service in 1859, the entrance to the building was flush with the street. When I retired in 1889, the entrance required climbing 3 steps. The building did not rise, The street rose. I watched it happen over 30 years. 30 years, 3 steps, roughly 6 to 8 inches per decade. Slow, but observable. But Warren was describing 5 to 6 feet. That is not slow, gradual accumulation. That is a significant volume of material placed on top of an existing surface. Now ask yourself, where did that material come from? Drainage work raises grade locally, along sloped roadbeds, not uniformly across an entire city. Landfill raises grade at shorelines, not in the interior of developed blocks. Foundation settlement explains why buildings sink, not why the ground rises. So what explains it? Researchers working with the concept of a civilization reset, the idea that a catastrophic event occurred in the 19th century after which survivors rewrote the historical record, point to several parallel anomalies appearing across American cities simultaneously. First, the census numbers. The U.S. Census records of 1800, 1810, and 1820 show urban population figures that do not match the number of structures visible on maps from the same period. Too many buildings for the documented population. Too much built infrastructure for the construction capacity on record. Second, identical architecture. During the same period, 1800 to 1850, buildings appeared in American cities from Boston to New Orleans bearing identical architectural details, the same column proportions, the same cornice profiles, the same decorative facade elements. The Greek Revival influence explains a shared style. That is a reasonable point. But the precision of similarity between buildings in different cities, allegedly constructed independently by different contractors, goes beyond a shared fashion. Third, the maps. Compare city maps from the 1790s with maps from the 1830s. The scale of urban development grows at a rate disproportionate to the documented population growth and economic capacity of the period. Fourth, the skills gap. Buildings from the first half of the 19th century in American cities show a level of stone-cutting craft and architectural complexity that requires generations of building tradition, specialized tools, and a large pool of trained craftsmen. Where did a country founded less than 50 years earlier produce that many master masons capable of executing complex classical orders at that scale and that speed? Let's say directly what the alternative version proposes. The civilization reset theory, sometimes called the Tartaria hypothesis, argues the following. In the early to mid-19th century, a more advanced civilization existed across North America with developed urban infrastructure already in place. That civilization was destroyed or severely disrupted by some catastrophic event, possibly a pandemic, possibly a natural disaster, possibly a war that was never documented by the people who won it. After that event, survivors or outside arrivals occupied the existing cities, buried the ruins, built on top, and constructed a narrative in which they themselves had built everything from scratch. 6 feet of soil above old first floors is not the result of drainage work. It is the result of burial of something that was not supposed to be seen. Who made that decision? We don't know. Why? To control the founding narrative, to present a clean historical slate on which new authorities could write whatever they chose. That is a significant claim, and it requires evidence we do not have in full. But here is what we do have. We have the testimony of Charles Warren, a professional city inspector with 16 years of experience, stating that Boston's street levels are inexplicably high relative to the existing buildings. We have the account of Mason McLaughlin stating the change happened fast, not gradually. We have Langdon's data showing the discrepancy in 11 of 14 American cities. We have Drake's memoirs describing 3 steps over 30 years in Philadelphia. We have the absence of documentation for municipal projects that should have left extensive records and did not. And we have geological findings. In 2009, a research team from the University of Vermont conducted geotechnical ground surveys in the historic center of Burlington ahead of a construction project. Their report, published in a geotechnical engineering journal, noted an anomaly. At a depth of 4 to 7 feet below the current street surface, researchers identified a stratum whose chemical composition indicated rapid deposition of a large volume of material, not gradual accumulation. The layer was uniform. Dating placed it in the mid-19th century. That is not drainage work. Drainage work produces uneven layers of varying composition along pipe corridors. That is a single, large-scale burial event covering the surface at one time. The report does not discuss this. It is a technical document about ground conditions, not history. The authors noted the anomalous layer and moved on. We are told that American cities in the 19th century were built by enterprising pioneers starting from nothing, on empty ground, from scratch, in a matter of decades. And we believe it, because that's what we were told, because it's a compelling story, a story about will overcoming circumstance. But when a professional inspector measures foundations and says something doesn't add up, his report gets filed and never referenced again. When a researcher compares 14 cities and finds the anomaly in 11 of them, he gets rejected by every journal he approaches. When geologists find a uniform, mid-19th century stratum under city streets, it stays a footnote in a geotechnical engineering report. 6 feet of earth. 6 feet is not dust, not sediment, not slow accumulation over centuries. 6 feet is a decision. Whose decision? Why? What is underneath it? We will probably never know the complete answer. Too much was destroyed, too long ago. But we can ask better questions. We can look at photographs of old cities and notice the sunken first-floor windows. We can ask for documentation of the municipal projects that should have generated extensive records and didn't. We can remember Charles Warren, a man who was simply doing his job, measuring, recording, asking, and whom history chose not to hear. The next time you walk through the historic district of any American city, look down. Look at how far the steps drop in front of old buildings, at how ground-floor windows end up below your feet, and ask yourself, what is underneath what you're walking on? If architectural anomalies and the questions official history prefers to ignore interest you, subscribe. I cover them every week.